Good evening, welcome everybody. Great turnout. I think I know most of you, or familiar with most of you. And again, hold on just a minute. My name is Pete Mike.
And we have the
No, but thanks for coming. This is, I'll give you a quick introduction how we're going to do this tonight. First of all, I want to recognize that we do have a thing called the District Advisory Board that handles things in District 2, which is what you're in here. District 2 is basically Woodlawn and Rock Road, north and south, and everything east of that. So, and I'm your council member, and kind of, I've heard that this is a nice turnout, so thank you for being here. If I can ask some of the District Advisory Board members that are here, if they would stand up, please. There's 8 of them here, and there's 11 on the District Advisory Board, so I appreciate it. They're a good board, they're a very bright board, and they help us a lot. Tonight you're going to hear about 2 things. You're going to hear a presentation about the budget coming up, which we've thought over time it's better to have a little more information exchange about the budget, and our city manager, Bob Layton, will be helping guide some of this, and there's some other directors of the, Bob, you're going to introduce your team, right?
Yeah.
No? Okay. I would, I got to know what their names are. All right, so anyway, oh, and coming in late is my wife, Susie. Okay, so in all seriousness, I've been in this job 3 years, and I think for those of you that know me, I just want to help try to, I don't want to sound cliche, but I want our city to just be better, okay? And that's, so you're going to hear some things tonight that are just, maybe that's a way to make our city better in a quicker way, or maybe not. You're going to have your own feelings, your own questions, so this is really about gathering information. The format is that, again, Bob will present, or somebody's going to present the budget, and then we're going to talk about the famous sales tax thing. 4 items are involved. We started out looking at 15 items from all the surveys, community engagement, narrowed it down to 10 or 12. Did white papers. It was a lot of fun reading. If you want copies of all of them, I can give it to you. Anyway, that narrowed it down. Really, there was kind of 4 priorities that, you know, basically the council agreed maybe these are the 4 most important right now. Other communities have done it. The city of Wichita does not have a sales tax. The city of Wichita has not done a sales tax for stuff, meaning infrastructure or building something like Oklahoma City's done, those kind of things. So we have not done that. We're not inventing the idea of sales tax. Other communities are doing it, like you saw Moline just did it recently. We have a county sales tax that's 1 cent. I've told a few of you there's 105 counties in Kansas, which is too many in my opinion, but can you erase that on the film? 96 of them have a county sales tax, and Sedgwick County has a county sales tax, of which half of it has gone to pay for Kellogg and stuff, and the other half has gone to reduce property taxes. It was passed in 1985, and in 1985 your mill levy was 42 mills, and in 1986 it was reduced to about 32 mills, and it stayed at 32 mills since then. So there is, way before my time, there is a consistency about that. So you're going to end up hearing about a couple of things, and one is the budget, and the other is the 4 items that we narrowed down for potentially a sales tax vote. I'm not here to say we should do it or not. I'm just helping explain what it is. And they are a water supply. You didn't notice we were in a drought about 2 or 3 years ago. One's about public transportation. One's about improving the neighborhood streets in a, what I would say is a quicker environment than what's in the capital improvement plan over time. It would elevate faster neighborhood streets. And then the last one is the jobs program that they call it jobs, to help hopefully we've lost 30,000 jobs in the last, since '08. A lot of it's aviation, and the so-called job experts, meaning a lot of the companies in town, feel like we need some kind of a fund to help initiate that. So those are the 4 items right now. Talking about maybe a 1-cent sales tax, talking about maybe a 5-year sunset, similar to what happened with the Interest Bank Arena. And we're sunset after 2.5 years, it raised, whatever. So I'm a big fan of the accountability and the transparency of all this stuff. And we've had a lot of discussion internally and externally about it. So with that, it should be an interesting night or evening. And at the end, then you're going to get to go to talk to each. There's 4 stations. You can talk to each one of them about that. Ask the questions. I see there's experts at every station. And then you can fill out whatever you want to comment about, pro or con questions, and go from there. So with that, thank you all for being here. And I will be around. I'll be in the back of the dunk tank. No, with that, I'll let you go. And here we go, Bob.
Thank you, Pete. I think I'm wired up here, so. Let's hear it for Councilmember Meitzner. Yeah. One good thing about working with Pete is he'll always steal your presentation. So any questions, I will try to go quickly through some of the things that he talked about, but I'm going to first talk about our operating budget. And by the way, I was brought here under false pretenses. He promised he would bake something for tonight. I don't see any cookies, pies, cakes, or anything like that, so I will get even with you later. We're going to talk about the operating budget first. The City Council is preparing really a 3-year budget, a modification in 2014, a new budget for 2015, and then several years ago they asked that we do long-range planning, and so that we also then do a budget for 2016 as well. Council will not formally adopt the 16 budget, so the issues that we're looking at to try to keep a balanced budget are really items that they want us to work on over the next year so that we position ourselves to be balanced in 16. It's really served us well, especially through the recession. The council took some really hard actions at the beginning of the recession, 2009, 2010, that took care of what I would call some structural deficits. So we have come out of the recession in a much better position than some other local governments, not just in this area, but in the state of Kansas, because again, they took actions that had financial benefits to us not one time, but annually going forward. This is our schedule. We've had 2 social media town halls. I'm going to share with you in a minute the results from one of those, but those have been really rewarding in terms of getting I think, very positive comments from our residents on how to move forward and some items to do differently as we look at trying to balance budget, not just in 15, but years in the future. The overall, or the overriding issues that we try to address during our budget process are listed here. First of all, in 2010, I believe, the City Council established priorities going forward, especially on how we were going to address the recession. What did we need to do? What do we need to protect during the downtime? And so those priorities still hold true today. Public safety, infrastructure, and economic development or job creation are the issues that are overriding concerns as we prepare every budget. We have tried, the council when I got here said we don't do enough to engage the public. We need to find new ways to do that, and we have worked hard in the last 4 years to bring much more public input into the budget process. Another thing that we do is the council they're firm believers in looking at outcomes and finding measures for our performance and being able to benchmark our performance against previous years as well as comparable cities. And we spend a lot of time in our budget looking at the business aspect of what we do. And of course, the last piece is that we'll always have a balanced budget and we will not grow any more than the revenues that we receive. This is, everybody wants a pie chart when we talk about the budget, so I thought I might as well throw it up early. This is in terms of where we are today. And let me just emphasize, Pete said this earlier, and I think it's important. The budget is not locked in at this point. We are trying to bring it out to not just the DAB members, but to the community as a whole, so that you can have some influence on the process. It used to be the manager would have a recommended budget. Things were pretty well locked in at that point. We'd have some public hearings, but it was almost too late for the public to have a real influence. Today, what we have is, this is my initial thought about where the budget should be. It's a preliminary budget, but it's not a recommended budget. I will not make that decision or that recommendation until later in July for the council. So this is where we are today. We're looking at a $218 million general fund budget. I always thought it would, I think it's interesting for you to see where our money comes from. The property tax is still the major funding source for the general fund. But then if you look at where that money goes, what many people are surprised about is over 70% of our dollars go for police, fire, and public works. And I told you the council, their priorities were public safety and infrastructure as well as job creation. And so that's reflective of what they have instructed us to do in terms of preparing the budget. These are some of the assumptions we've used in preparing the budget. We're assuming the general fund will be balanced, and it is right now. That we have some limited growth. We may have about a 1.5% increase in property valuations for 2015, which for me is fantastic. I've been dancing for a week once we finally got those numbers from the county, because that's the first time we've had that kind of growth since I arrived in 2009. And I'd like to hope it wasn't my influence that drove everything down, but so it's been good. We're not talking about massive layoffs or elimination of positions. We're talking about more strategic moves to continue to control costs. For the 21st year, our mill levy will remain flat. There will be no increase in the mill levy. And these at the bottom, just a few of the issues that impact us and impact you both at home and in your businesses. We're looking at our cost for health insurance. We know what's happening with fuel. And then, of course, in your own businesses, wages drive a big part of what you do. So what is it we're going to accomplish with the 2015 budget? And these are just, right now, this is what is in the budget for comment from all of you and from the council. We've successfully received a federal grant to fund 6 new firefighter positions, and we'll have that funding for 2 years. And after that, then we'll make some decisions about extending those positions and how they would be used in the department. When I got here, the council was concerned about the way we were spending marketing dollars, if you want to call it that, advertising for some of our programs, but also then promoting the city's brand and how we promote the community. We have now put together a consolidated marketing plan, and one that's more strategic in its approach. Before, we did it kind of department by department. We've now pulled all those together into one plan. We've heard a lot of complaints and concerns about the impact that the drought has had on street trees. We're going to enter into, in fact, we're going to do this in 2014, a $250,000 contract with private tree services to help supplement what we're doing, so we can get off the curb some of the most dangerous trees that perished during the drought. Our transit system continues to remain stressed. We have been using Band-Aids to keep the system moving forward, but we've done so in a way that really probably all of us would agree is not sound from a business perspective. We've delayed capital purchases. We have made cuts in routes that have reduced our ridership, which in turn reduces our federal funding levels, and has been kind of I won't say it's a death spiral, but it's a deadly spiral, and one that we have to change the way we're doing business, and we'll talk about that under the sales tax piece. But the budget right now doesn't anticipate that revenue will come in, which means we have some serious issues that have to be addressed in 2016. Also, I really won't talk too much about the first item. The council is committed to funding the cultural arts, a little over $1 million. That commitment was made several years ago, and we're now finalizing some new agreements with those agencies. We heard a lot about snow removal last year during the bad storm. I've also been concerned that we've maybe not had a right-sized budget, and we've had to find money other places in the budget during bad years. Many of you may remember I came from Iowa. It was a little easier to predict what your budget would be because you knew how much snow was going to get dumped on you most years. Here it's kind of a little more unpredictable. We're going to increase spending authority by about $750,000, and we're looking at the use of contractors to supplement what we're doing. And so when we get to the big storms, the ones that need a little quicker attention, or else they're going to freeze on the streets for a period of time, the storm, during the real severe conditions, we'd like to have some backup. And then the last thing on this slide is last year I proposed closing or doing something different with the Riverside Zoo. I probably, should have told you all that I will steal your firstborn child. I had a lot of reaction to that. And some would probably give me your firstborn child, but that's a different story. And also, we had talked about making Watson Park either self-sufficient or getting it closer to self-sufficiency. And we have had some great conversation in the community about both of those items. We're not to the point of having consensus or a firm plan, especially with Watson Park. We have a master plan that council hasn't adopted yet. I think the community, especially the community around the park, is pretty satisfied with our approach, but we want to make sure that we have enough buy-in going forward. And so I've delayed those actions until 2016, and we'll use 15 to bring conclusion to both of those items with the council. In 2016, we had a little bit of a deficit projected, and so there are a couple of things we're looking at in order to try to reduce that deficit. One is to really review the way that emergency services, rescue services are provided in this county. Today, if you have almost any medical emergency, the first responder in all likelihood will be one of our fire units. Well, I'm not sure that's what all of you expect it to be, and it's not that we don't have a strong level of service, but in most cases you're not going to get a paramedic then initially. So we'll be able to provide some initial service, and then we have to wait till the county ambulance arrives. That's happened over a period of time almost by default. We haven't had what I consider to be a strategic approach to our rescue services. Today, we're really not a fire department, we're a rescue department, and our supplemental work is fire work. And we just need to speak, I think, in honest terms about what patient care should be, what your expectations are as residents, and what our department should be doing, and do we have the right mix of rescue services. So we're going to have that discussion with the county and other providers in 2015, hopefully impacting the 2016 budget in order to try to change that level of care. And then we had a lot of discussion last year about the possible elimination of the helicopter unit in the police department during social media sessions, as well as meetings like this. People said, let's leave that helicopter alone. We understand it plays an important role in our police work. I think we've now right-sized that unit, and the budget in 16 and actually in 15 will now reflect the number of hours that are necessary to support that program. I mentioned that we had a May 21st social media town hall. We also had one June 18th. Don't have the results back to summarize with you for the 18th, but you can see we had over 100,000 page views, 500 likes, a lot of comments were received. It was a really great session. One of the things is, I hope, if I were to ask you to raise your hand if you read Opinion Line, I hope no one would raise their hand. But if you do happen to let your eyes stray to Opinion Line every now and then, you probably will get a different opinion about the city of Wichita, not just the organization, but the community as a whole. I wish all of you could participate in a social media town hall meeting, because that's where you see the people that really are Wichita. Where we brought some last year and this year, but especially last year, we brought some serious issues in front of the public and asked for their comments. And Watson Park is a great example. People didn't condemn us for trying to find a different model. Instead, they said, we're willing to participate. We're willing to raise money for improvements in the park. We're willing to help even repair the train. I mean, there are a whole lot of things like that we got again this year, and when we asked for feedback. And it's just wonderful the way this community has responded to it. Some of the issues we talked about: animal control, People told us what works and what isn't working, and we're going to address some of those issues in 14 and in 15 as a result of that response. Tree removal, I told you we put money in the budget as a result of some of the comments we received. We heard from a lot of people that they were very supportive of what we were trying to do to help the homeless through the homeless outreach team, and they've already successfully found permanent housing for over 100 people that have been on the street in 2013 and 14. Street maintenance people, the jury's still out regarding some of the experiments we've had in treatment, the new treatment methods that we're using, and so we're going to continue to work on that. Snow removal, I've already addressed that as well. So those items have been reflected or addressed in the budget recommendations that I'm considering right now. Again, reminder of where we are in terms of the budget schedule. I'll make my final recommendations to the council on the 15th, and then we'll have 2 of the formal public hearings. But at this point, what I'd really like to do is get your feedback regarding anything that you've seen or any other issues that you'd like us to make sure that we address as we go forward with the budget.
Do we have a program systems management review on an annual basis? Because I think some of these departments have not looked at themselves for a very long time. And you can find a lot of areas for improvement. Such as, if you look at the municipal court system, it is a disaster, for the last time. Because everybody, young person, is a criminal or a criminal record. I'm in a rental business, and when I pull their records, some of them have as many as 30 cases. It should be that way.
Right.
If we look at the system and figure out where we can make some changes, that will help the citizens to have a better quality of life, and it won't overload the municipal court system.
Right. You were not a plant, so I do appreciate the question. 2 things in response. First of all, over the last 3 years, as part of the council's instructions to look at what we're doing top to bottom, and also to address what I said we had a structural deficit in the budget, we reviewed all of our organization, and especially at middle and upper level management. And we restructured our management in each department over that 3-year period. I think your issue about timeliness of review is a great one. When we went through that exercise with the police department, they readily said that their organization hadn't changed for all practical purposes in terms of the boxes on the org chart for probably 20 years. So we were, here we were kind of using old school model with obviously great change in crime prevention and law enforcement work during that period of time. So I think we've done the right job in right sizing and repurposing the organization. But that isn't enough, and what we've done, a few years ago we opened an office of project management and process improvement. The last 2 years we've focused on the project management piece of that. We now have hired a new staff person, just started with us this past week, that it will focus on process improvement. And then we're bringing another person in that has both disciplines that will be coming in. So we'll have a 3-person office that will be doing that. We have been spending time talking about code enforcement and how we can streamline that process, and how our code enforcement staff works with the courts, and where it works and where it doesn't work, and we're trying to work again through all of that. But it's a great question, and one that I think we've been pretty responsive in terms of we have to be a little more businesslike and constantly looking for improvement. Thanks. We have other questions. Yeah, they're telling me we need to make sure we use the roaming mic here.
Who's got a question?
Right up here. David.
This is outside the operating levy, but you have benchmarks for borrowed money too, and we were in trouble there for a while. Could you comment on where we are as far as debt versus benchmark?
Sure. If there's anything that Council Member Meitzner focuses on from our financial standpoint, it has to do with our debt load. In fact, he has some bullet points that sometimes I even forget the numbers in terms of what we've done, but our goal, and Mark, help me if I'm wrong here, but our goal has been to try, whenever we incur debt or we finance capital improvement projects, we try to do about 50%, is that right? About 50% cash and 50% debt. What happened is, over a period of time, in my mind, and I try not to be too judgmental because it happened before I got here, but I felt like the capital improvement program got a little out of control, and we got to a point where our debt projections were moving us into an area that wasn't very healthy from when we benchmark ourselves against the standards that Standard & Poor's uses to measure financial condition. And so the council had to make some really tough decisions starting in 2010 about trimming back, reprioritizing and trimming back our capital projects. We've also then been successful. So that, when I got here, our debt line was about like that. We brought it, we're about to here now, and it's a lot more manageable. We've also refinanced about, how much in our debt? 100 and, Sean? So yeah, about 150 million in debt has been refinanced, and we've had much more favorable rates as a result of refinancing that debt in this current climate. So that has translated into pretty significant savings for property tax funded debt as well as utility funded debt.
Well, does it follow that part of that debt is specials?
Yes.
A lot of cities don't fund specials.
Right. Right.
How does that impact our
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. The question was, how do special assessments play into our debt? About 50% of our debt, if I remember correctly, is attributed to special assessments. And those are expenses paid for the development of public improvements in subdivisions. And the city of Wichita has done that for a number of years. I've never advocated, I'm not comfortable with the amount of debt that we have partially coming out of special assessments, but it would be such a significant change in practice, and it would shift those costs. Homeowners are going to pay for them one way or the other, but people have kind of become used to seeing it in the special assessments. If I could get...
Those guys, the way we used to do it.
It's the way we've done it for a long time, and it is very controversial if we talk about shifting those costs to the developer, and then the developer would pass those costs on to the homeowner. Today would be it's not the time to do it. The construction industry still hasn't rebounded. That probably would be the last nail in the coffin if we told that the developers and the home builders they were going to have to pay for all of those when the market is still down. I don't know that many of them would have the financing tools to be able to fund that, and I think that would bring housing to a screeching halt in the community. When we get to more robust times again, maybe that's when we start talking about some better mix of private financing and special assessments.
We've lived out in Forest Hills for the last 13 years. Phil's the president of that neighborhood association, but there are a couple of properties out there. One I go by every day when I'm walking, and they are so unbelievably, and the one I walk by every day, the weeds in the driveway have grown so big they can't even pull in their driveway anymore. And the people that live across the street from them said they've been trying to get something done about it for about 20 years because they've lived out there much longer than we have. The other property I don't buy every day, but it's my understanding that they came out to trim some trees. This was a few years back. And he actually got a gun. They had to call the police and everything. But they're just like the one that I talk about that I go by every day. I mean, it is an eyesore for everybody that lives around. And the people across the street have a beautiful property there. And who do you contact? I mean, they've turned it in a number of times.
I'll give you my card afterwards. If you just email me, then I'll make sure it gets in the right hands.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I know. We know who to contact. It's just that they say they've been contacting somebody for 20 years and nothing.
I need to know the circumstances, and that's why if you give me the addresses, I can find out exactly why we've had problems. Okay. Thank you.
This is a 20,000-foot view of the operating budget.
Right.
Is there any place in one 50,000-foot view of the whole shebang that Wichita deals with financially? In other words, the CIP, the operating budget, your debt, the debt service, anything else I can think of?
Right.
Is there any document that shows the whole boundaries, the four corners of what our financial situation really is?
Not a single document. The closest we would come would be our comprehensive annual financial report. It will show both operating and debt information for the city, and the council actually is receiving that now. It'll be on their next agenda, if I remember, on Tuesday. And we have two documents in the front of that, I guess they're documents. One's a transmittal letter, and the other's called the Management Discussion and Analysis. Is that right? MD&A. And that tries to give you a better understanding of the city's financial condition. The MD&A is to be written in a neutral way, no promotion. It's just simply, here's how the money was received, spent. Where do you have problems? Where do you, everything okay? And then the transmittal letter tries to highlight some other pieces of our financials. But that would be a good starting point, and we'll have that online probably after Tuesday, sometime next week. Mm-hmm. I'll be around after this to answer any individual questions you have about the budget, but I also want to spend a little bit of time on the sales tax proposal that Councilmember Meitzner referenced. So if we can move on to that. I want to underscore what he said before I start this presentation. The council has simply said that they are considering the use of sales tax in order to move some initiatives forward. They will not make that final decision until August 5th. And we're in a 30 to 45 day period where they are receiving comments from all of you. I want to emphasize you have a comment card or comment sheet that is extremely important that you take, if you can take a few minutes to fill out your, those sheets, let us know your thoughts about the sales tax issues that are under discussion, because we're putting all of that together into a final document for consideration of the council. We're going to give that to them on July 22nd and make that public as well, and then they'll have a few weeks to kind of process all that information before they have to make a final decision. So everything I'm sharing with you right now are the council's initial thoughts, not anything that has been put in stone. A reminder of how we got here. We started a strategic planning process last year, and council asked us to do a serious public engagement. So first thing we did was send out a community survey. And WSU helped put that together, made sure that we had a statistically sound sampling so that we could depend on the results from that instrument. And then we also went out and talked to folks in the community. And the idea was not to go to 6 community meetings and ask people to attend like tonight, but also go to where people meet on a regular basis. So we basically party crashed and went to over 100 community meetings, touched over 2,000 people, and asked them to help us identify the community's priorities going forward so the council could do strategic planning for the next 5 years. This just simply talks about the survey. I kind of have the slides out of order. And as a result of that, Pete talked about the fact that there were, I think he's right, there were a significant number, maybe 15 items that came out of that process. Council then narrowed that down to 8 items they thought were the most important and ranked the highest in that priority process. The 4 on the left are the ones we're going to talk about tonight. Those are ones that were brought forward, and the council said, we're struggling with trying to address those priorities with our existing resources. And so we need to talk about whether or not it's appropriate to have another funding source that we don't have today. The 4 on the right, affordable housing and homelessness, council asked us to do some more work on those issues. There's a feeling that when we bring a strategic plan back to them on those 2 combined, that there are some issues we can address with our existing resources and what we project to be increases in the budget in the next few years, and then other things that we'll probably need supplemental assistance with. But the council also thinks there are private solutions and nonprofit solutions that can be applied to these issues as well. So we're looking at partnerships as much as anything in addressing our long-term homelessness and affordable housing issues. The third item, Pete, you probably haven't heard about this one, but we've been talking about passenger rail, and we have money identified to help us move forward through a study process. And since we don't know what the end result will be of the study process, it didn't seem right to be talking about any kind of other funding for that today. And then quality of life is the same way. We were looking at the long-term plans for C2, for performing arts and other facilities in the community. Not ready yet to any roll out a plan. So again, we weren't going to ask folks to bet on the come and provide some funding for a plan that we really weren't ready to discuss. So let's talk about the 4 issues for going forward. The first, in terms of water supply planning, the whole idea is to make sure that we have adequate water through 2060. If we have any kind of robust economic growth going forward, we're going to have a hard time making sure that our water supply today helps us all the way, that is, we can sustain it all the way through 2060. So we have that first issue. But probably more importantly is we have issues with drought. And we have to plan not just for regular growth, but to get us through the drought periods. A lot of people said, what is your plan? What has the council said they want to do when we get into the drought? And when the council adopted a drought plan last year, and I put it up here, first of all, so you know that, because a lot of people didn't understand that when it was adopted last year. And then just to call your attention to a couple of the most important parts of that plan. If we get to a point where Cheney, which is our main water supply, gets down to 35% to 50% of its capacity, we would have to ban outdoor water in order to be able to get us through a serious drought. And then in the fourth, where Cheney gets below 35% of its total capacity, not only would you have to eliminate outdoor watering, but you'd have to reduce household and business consumption by 15%. And that has obviously a staggering impact on our local economy. If we move forward, go through a serious drought, and this would be like a Dust Bowl drought, so we're talking about 9 years roughly of drought. Now that doesn't mean you're not going to have wet periods, but over a long period of time you have dry conditions where you get close to Dust Bowl. We would be in stages 3 and 4, so basically we would lose lawns and golf courses and everything else for almost 6 years of the 9-year drought. If we are able to identify another water source or supplement what we have with 10 million gallons of water a day, we could actually, even during that severe drought period, we would basically stay out of the stages 3 and 4. So that's why the council asked us to look at this issue as closely as we have.
Basically, just to make sure, these charts were difficult, but the bottom two, the brown, just to make sure you understand, those are when he said 6 years of the 9 years, that's the brown is the stage 3 and 4 on the left is the bad news. And then you go to the next one,
right.
Same chart.
Right, same drought, but just with that supplemental water, we're not there, right? We brought to the council 9 plans, and after doing additional work and having them consider those, we got down to basically 2. And that's one is purchasing water from El Dorado, and the other is supplementing what we currently do with our ASR, our underground storage program. And we have costs that we have developed for each of those. I'm not going to get into all the details. There's 3 or 4 different options in El Dorado. We've now received a more formal proposal from El Dorado, which also has a possibility of purchasing raw water and treating it ourselves. So we're in the process of analyzing everything that they've given us. We have a team of consultants that have been working on water issues with us for a period of time. El Dorado had a different analysis of their proposal than what we had, so we have now locked the consultants in the room together, kept staff out of it, and said, you're all going to come out of there with with agreement on what the numbers are and the benefits are. And so we'll have a cost-benefit analysis of the El Dorado options, and we should have those in the next 3 weeks or so. At the same time, we had a lot of questions about ASR and about the assumptions we were making, so we have a special consultant that we've brought on board, and they are in the process of doing what basically is an initial design. It's just a 1% design, but it's going through a number of considerations to make sure that the plan that consultants had put together, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago, as an alternative, that we have more detail and we can have certainty regarding the success of that ASR program. This tells you what the rate impact would be, and without focusing too much, on all of the details. If we had no sales tax and we had to move forward with the most expensive El Dorado option, we would see an increase of rates of about 41% between now and 2060. Plus, and on top of that would then come our normal operational costs and any increases associated with that. So these are costs just associated with the new water source. And then ASR, it would go all the way down to an ASR solution that would be about a 6% increase. If you have a sales tax, we drive that all the way down from 41% down to 11%, and then about 1% for ASR improvements. Those are our initial numbers. Yes, Pete?
Make sure everybody understands what ASR means.
That is aquifer storage and recovery.
That's the aqueous beds recharge on this.
Right. It wouldn't be a government presentation if I didn't have, initials and acronyms.
If I can echo what Bob said, you recall that when Bob got here, I got here 3 years ago, Bob got here about 4.5 years, 5 years ago. He saw tremendous flexibility, fluctuation in rates. And then when Bob got here and our new director of
Public Works and Utilities.
Anyway, they felt that if we could have a standard operating cost rate increase that was more, for sure single digit was the goal. They determined anywhere from like a 3 to 5 to 6% rate increase on water to help take care of the commercial and residential. And for sure the commercial people could plan and the citizens would know that, okay, this is about what we're going to get. So this thing is separate from what he was talking about, your standard yearly potential probably rate increases, especially if we have inflation and things like that. So there's been stuff in the news that it's only 1.3 or 6.2. Well, I'll take the 6.2 any day. Well, that's 6.2 on top of 4, 5, 6, maybe, whatever it's going to be. So it's a little more drastic than this is just the new water supply.
Right. That's a great point of clarification. A lot of discussion about the jobs fund. Many of you know that we've lost about 30,000 jobs in the community since 2008. Yes?
Before you go on to that,
yeah.
I've had this question for the last few years about, you talk about getting water from El Dorado
right.
and down into the reserve. What would be wrong with just, we have this tremendous overflow of water that runs, like just for the last couple of days with all this rain we've had. We've had millions of gallons of water that have just gone downstream that we haven't captured. What would be wrong with just running a pipe to El Dorado Lake from, some strategic point on there where all this money or all this water collects and just piping it into Cheney Lake while it's there? I don't know, maybe I'm thinking too simply on this, but that seems to me if we're going to run a pipe from El Dorado, why wouldn't we just run a pipe from our own resource over to our water resource and then recapture it as we need it?
Right. And actually, well, first of all, right now Cheney doesn't have the capacity to take additional water, so that's the first issue. So, but your theory is what we're using for the ASR option. And I didn't want to get into all the details, but I have more. I would love to talk about that. What we're talking about right now is we have 2 intakes, and we only pull out about half of what we're allowed to pull out of the Little Arkansas. So during these periods of time, we could pull out of both of our intakes if we had a structure where we could store that water. And so we're talking about building an on-site reservoir by ASR so we can take advantage of that water so it doesn't go downstream and is wasted, and then we can treat that over time and put it underground. And the beauty of ASR is that it becomes an underground reservoir with no evaporation. So we actually are able to retain a little bit more of that water supply. Again, that's as much as a city manager ought to know about water. Alan King, our director, is here. He could answer more detailed questions about it. But your concept is exactly what we're trying to do with that new ASR approach. And frankly, you don't have the transportation costs then of bringing water over from El Dorado. Jobs fund. This slide to me is really compelling, and this was not initially discussed when the jobs plan was rolled out, but this shows our job growth in Sedgwick County over the last 40 years, and it's in decade or 10-year increments. And obviously the 70s, we had a robust period of time in terms of growth. That came down in the 80s and 90s, and then we've been down to we were down to a 1% growth rate in the 2000-2010 period. If you were to take another graph that showed aviation and how it did during that period of time, I think those lines would be awfully close to each other. To me, this is really a compelling argument for the need for diversification in this community. And the whole purpose of the Jobs Fund is for us to fund a diversification plan, and one that makes a lot of sense. Again, setting the stage, and the council has relied on some of this information as they've considered the seriousness of the issue. This busy chart basically shows a number of cities that we use to compare ourselves with, and it shows that Wichita is the red line. If you follow it up prior to the recession, we are up near the top in terms of our economic activity and our employment in this community. Everyone dropped during the recession. We dropped a little deeper than most, but the worst part of it is during the recovery, we have stayed down at the bottom, while people like Dallas, Des Moines, Oklahoma City, Denver, Omaha, Tulsa, Kansas City have all risen at a much greater rate. Again, to me, an argument for diversification. We've spent a lot of time looking at this issue. I think there was some bad messaging when the Jobs Fund was first discussed. There was a lot of folks thought it was going to be an $80 million fund to write checks to folks, $5,000 per job, in every business, and that's not the case at all. But I know my thought process has been refined through discussions I've had with John Barlow at WSU, and if you followed what he's been proposing for his innovation campus, it's a whole different thought process about job creation. And it recognizes that you can't turn your back on aviation, but there are probably some really smart ways to diversify. And I'll give you an example. He's been working with a consultant team, and we've got an aviation cluster, and a lot of economic development and a lot of economic growth comes from cluster growth and cluster development. Well, a lot of folks think the only way you can turn your economy around is to develop new clusters. Well, what this team says is that's maybe not the clearest thinking. What you probably ought to be doing is taking advantage of the capabilities that are in your community, the skill sets that are available, and looking for other opportunities for the use of those skills. And they use as an example the heating and cooling manufacturing industry. There's certain firms that have a presence in Kansas that need assistance with advanced manufacturing and materials processing. They said, we've been calling ourselves the aviation capital of the world. We probably ought to call ourselves the advanced manufacturing capital of at least the United States, and recognize we have a strength there, and that you have a lot of machine shops that right now are primarily relying on aviation business that could now, with retooling, which is part of the infrastructure, and retraining, which is the workforce piece, could now also be taking that expertise and applying it to things like heating and cooling and other manufacturing. So you don't turn your back on your manufacturing base, you don't try to be something brand new, but instead you find other ways to use those skills. Tim Chase is here from GWEDC. Tim has been talking about this same approach for over a year, and I really think this is the way that we should grow our future, so that we are not dependent on aviation for our economic growth. And then the 20% is to help with other, I don't even want to call them incentives, but investments in companies moving forward. But that's not the key piece of this, and that could take many forms, but we're trying to get away from, again, that mentality of we'll write a check for every job created. Yeah, David.
There's currently 19 workforce training programs in the city. Mm-hmm. Could we redirect some of those training programs to the area that you're talking about instead of making this number 20?
You mean the 40 instead? You mean the workforce training? Oh, yeah. No, we have no intention of creating a new structure. We're talking about that workforce training will occur within agencies that currently provide workforce training and within the companies themselves. And in many cases, and Tim can talk about this, we'll find that the job training can best be done by in-house staff or by them using people coming from the outside, and it's just a matter of how do we go ahead and help, like with the machine shop, how do you help them get the right expertise? There's been a lot of talk about who's going to make these decisions, and the recommendation right now is that there be a special trust or commission put together that has public and private representation, with the private sector being the majority vote on the commission, and then also that there be an oversight committee for the entire sales tax that would make sure that the money is spent as it was promised in the ballot. And that's similar to what they did when they built Intrust Arena. There was an independent committee that reviewed all of the expenditures for the arena. I'm not going to focus too much on this. These are just a number of steps that Tim and his staff and the city and county and private sector are undertaking today and will undertake in the future with or without the sales tax funding. And then I threw this slide in just because I think it's kind of compelling. If we continue on the 1% growth rate, which it appears today a lot of our projections are we're going to be that way for at least a number of years, that's the blue line at the bottom. If we're successful in increasing our growth rate from 1% to 4%, you will get a line similar to what's on the top, the red line. And I look at things from my perspective, selfishly, and that is, that would generate $2.5 billion in additional city revenues that we could then use to tackle the priorities that we had on the list, not just those that we're considering for sales tax today for just 5 years, but also many of these other programs, as well as continue to put money in infrastructure, continue to put money in law enforcement in some of the areas that are priorities for the community. So that shows, I think, it quantifies a little bit of the benefit from increased jobs in the community. Public transit is the next issue that the council asked us to take a look at. There are over 2 million trips a year on our transit system. I think all of us would agree this is not a robust system at all, that in many ways it's broken, but we're still serving people with 2 million trips to the doctor's office, to jobs, and for shopping. Most of these people are transit dependent. They have no other way to get to to have those trips. And in order for us to be able to keep doing those 2 million, I told you, we followed some pretty bad practices. And unfortunately, it's only going to get worse, because with the reduction in state and federal funding and the limitations we have with the property tax, I'm not overly optimistic that after 2016 we're going to be able to continue the system the way it is. And so something's going to have to be done differently in order for us to provide transit for those who really need it in the community. This slide just simply says that through the community participation process, we heard a lot of folks say that this was an important issue and one that's been ignored too long in the community. The takeaway from this slide for me is that there is an economic benefit from transit. The American Public Transit Association says for every dollar you put into transit, you get $4 generated in the community. A lot of that comes from the job-related trips. And one of the things that's come up from several of these meetings is that folks say, even if you could extend this service that you have today into the future, that still doesn't address a lot of our job needs. There are a lot of second shift workers who, or people who want second shift jobs, who have no way to get to those jobs because of the limited hours we have for transit service. So again, that I think feeds into that generator of economic return from our investment in transit. The proposal right now would call for about 1/10 of 1 cent that would go for the next 5 years towards transit, about $8 million a year. That would allow us to stabilize our service, but more importantly, allow us to make the capital investments that we've deferred over the last few years. And the hope is that by also making some tweaks in the system, some changes in service levels that we could build even a greater base. And then that, of course, has economic benefit to us because the more riders we get, the more federal assistance we get, and so everything starts to come back in the right positive direction. Yes, sir.
What is the P&L of the transit system as it exists today?
We were really fortunate. I'm going to give Steve Spade, our director, a tremendous amount of credit for this, along with the advisory board that he works with, that we were pretty close to break even last year. But again, remember, we didn't put the money aside for the capital, and we were still cutting service in order to make that happen. So we were taking some short-sighted approach to balancing.
We bought buses again recently, and it's still diesel. We're still reluctant to change fuel sources.
I just like the smell of diesel, don't you? Yeah, the question was, we bought some buses recently that are diesel. Are we committed to looking at alternatives? Steve and his staff are just finishing up an analysis of the use of compressed natural gas. So that we may be moving in that direction.
How about smaller buses? Because when you smaller areas on islands, they particularly have a van instead of a huge bus with 2 people sitting in the back of it.
Right.
We have to design our transportation system which can efficiently transport people at a more frequent time. Also, have you considered allowing private small vans or buses to carry passengers at the same fare as the city will? Some of the small islands do that and it works very good.
I'm going to let Steve, maybe afterwards, I'll let Steve address your question on the privatization when we break out to groups. I do want to address the large bus, small bus issue. When we don't have the capital to buy the buses needed for the system, that means we don't really have the capital to buy smaller buses because we have to size for the peak periods, right? So that means we have to have an inventory of buses that can address the morning and afternoon rush hours. If I had the luxury to be able to to have more in our inventory, then we could go to some smaller buses. That's one response. Second is we are looking at alternatives like van pooling. And Steve has initiated with the board and the council approval some feeder service where we do run some smaller buses or smaller vehicles through the neighborhoods and then feed into the larger system. And that's doesn't always save a lot of money, but it is more convenient, and we build ridership through that. So those are some of the initial responses when we hear that. Also, there's a misconception that our buses run empty through a lot of the midday. I took a bus at invitation of some of our riders at about 10:30 one morning, and our bus was 3/4 full, and then when we dumped out of the transit center, it was almost like it was 5 o'clock. I mean, there were that many people. Again, you have to have a lot of people on buses if you generate 2 million trips a year. And I think if you go to the transit center, you will be surprised at how many people ride the bus. Steve can give you a more intelligent answer and a more detailed answer when we do the breakout. So can Ron. I've heard Ron do it. So. The last issue is pavement maintenance. I have been here for 5 years, and every time I go to a community meeting, I hear about the condition of our residential streets. As a result of that, over the last few years, the council has doubled the amount of money that we put into residential streets, or into our street system. We now have $8 million worth of contract work that's done every year. We started at $4 million. We have recommended to the council that over the next few years, we try to ramp that up to $10 million. We also are using a new model that looks more at return on investment and extending the useful life of our streets. What that means, though, is that we're going to spend a lot more time focusing on the streets that are in good condition today and try to keep them in good condition and extend them. And my staff uses a great example. It's just like your house. You paint your siding every few years so that you can preserve that siding, right, and don't have to do a replacement. The downside to that is that we're going to have some streets that are in fairly bad condition that are going to need to be reconstructed at some point. And what's part of the sales tax proposal is an influx of cash over that 5-year period that will allow us to deal with the worst conditioned streets and start to do some of that reconstruction work. Eventually, we're going to have to put that into the budget anyway, but it's going to take some time before we can address it. That's why the recommendation to move forward with this. This chart simply depicts what I talked about, and I won't get into it, we're kind of getting late, but it talks about the extension of the useful life of our street system based on your investment levels. Just a couple of final comments about the sales tax itself. What was discussed was a 5-year sales tax. It would generate just under $400 million. $250 million would go towards water, $80 million towards job creation, almost $40 million for transit, and almost $30 million, or $28 million, excuse me, for pavement maintenance. A reminder, just to underscore again what Councilmember Meitzner talked about, 1986, countywide sales tax was approved. The money received by the city, the council committed to go to property tax reduction and to large transportation improvement projects. Kellogg, the project that will go on for another 200 years, has received most of the money, with some of it going also to the 13th Street flyover. And this chart depicts what, again, Councilmember Meitzner mentioned. As I remember, the mill levy dropped by $10 roughly, and the council since that time has dropped it by another $2. So this chart shows where we are in relation to neighboring communities, both from a sales tax standpoint, we're at total rate, as well as where we are with our property tax mill levy. And you'll see we are by far the lowest with our mill levy.
Bob,
yes, Pete.
One quick comment on that. Again, most of the counties in the state have a sales tax. We do, Butler does, Harvey, Sumner. I don't know why Sumner does. They have a lot of revenue coming in from the casino, which is probably a lot of your money. But on the right-hand side is the mill levies in each of those cities. That's the city mill levy. That's not the county mill levy. That's not the school district mill levy. So that's the mill levy. I would comment, as I've been looking around, there's a county called Johnson County of Kansas City. That third column, their county sales tax in Johnson County is 1.2%. And the cities in Johnson County, you know them, Overland Park, Leawood, you can name the 5 or 6 of them, whatever they are. Each of those have a city sales tax on top of the 1.2%. And the lowest one I saw so far, I think, was Olathe at like 1.1%. Some of them have a 1.5, and even higher on top of the 1.2. So part of my feedback I've received about this is like, you know, everybody in the state's kind of doing something. Doesn't mean we have to do anything. But when people say we're taxed to death, we have an incredibly low, from the city perspective, mill levy, and we have exactly 0 city sales tax when most others do. Mulvane just approved mine yesterday for a half. I'm not advocating we need to do it. I just think it's valuable to see what's going on in our state, and then we could do the comparison for Oklahoma City and Tulsa and those kind of things too. But that tries to give you a perspective of what's going on. Newton does not have a sales tax, third one from the bottom, but Harvey County has a 2% tax. If Coffeyville was up there, you'd see Coffeyville with a 3% city sales tax. So it's kind of all over the place. Matter of fact, we're limited by law, by state law, that the cities can only have as much as a 3% sales tax on top of any county sales tax. So it's perspective. I'm not advocating, I'm just telling you that's what's going on around us, and that gives you a perspective.
You can see why at the staff level we call that the Meitzner slide.
Is this a council decision, or are they recommending for a while?
It'll be, the only decision council will make is to put it on a ballot. It's whether to put it on or not. Yeah, no, it'll be a decision of the electorate on whether or not we actually implement a sales tax.
Will this sales tax remain permanent or go away after 5 years?
Right now, the whole idea is that it will sunset 5 years from now, and the only way it would be extended would be another vote of the people. And our goal in most of these is to make them so that they're sustainable going past 5 years without a sales tax. I mean, obviously we have a serious transit issue. We're going to have to come to grips with that. And, you know, there may be some other issues we have to look at after 5 years. But we're really trying to make this as sustainable as possible. This is I just want to again give you the timetable so you know what we're doing. A reminder that the council will have this information on the 22nd and will make a decision finally about whether there's a referendum on the 5th. With that, I'd be happy to answer any general questions. The whole idea was to allow you to get your questions answered at the tables. I've got on the right side, I think on street maintenance, Joe Pager from our Public Works Department. In the back, I have, who do I have? That's Transit, that's Steve Spade, our director. Wayne Chambers with GWDC and a wonderful business owner in our community is here to address issues on the Jobs Fund, and Alan King is our Public Works Director, is here to answer questions on water. So with that, yes?
In your earlier picture, you had 29% of your revenue was from sales tax. What is the city's sales tax rate? You said LA up there.
City doesn't have a sales tax. We receive part.
How do you get 29% of your revenue from sales tax?
Right. We receive part of the countywide 1-cent sales tax, and that's what that represents, and that's the money that goes to property tax reduction and to transportation improvements. So it's collected by the county. It's not a city sales tax.
Do you get revenue from?
We do. Yes, we do.
What percentage of this is include sales tax? How much income do you come from food?
That is a great question. I don't know. Mark, do you know that, or Sean? I'm sorry, I don't know that.
Please do away with the sales tax on food. Up to the 1% that you're talking about, maybe 2%, but do away with food tax, sales tax on food.
Right. I don't know that. I don't know what state law allows us to do. Another way to achieve what you're asking is to allow for a rebate program. Some people have done that. That's awkward for folks and it requires some proof of expense, and nobody's going to keep all of their grocery receipts. But I haven't had that question asked very often. I know people don't like the Kansas sales tax for that reason.
People can't afford it.
Right. And I've also heard about it on medicine as well.
The sales taxes you're putting on poor people. You know, and probably everybody in this room can afford the 1%, but there are people that can't.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your
Why
name?
can't you use property tax, increase the property tax rate to cover this program?
That's a question for the council member probably, and for the community. One thing is before Pete.
We have the lowest mill
Right.
levy
Yeah.
in all these cities by
Right.
far. It would seem to me that we do have the option to raise the tax rate to cover all these programs.
Right.
Especially transit, that's an ongoing program.
It-
You're going to need
right.
money after a 5-year period. The only proposal there that fits, sales tax to me is the water program. That's a one-time deal. Get in there and spend the money. That's what the sales tax should be for.
Right.
It should not be to fund ongoing expenses.
Oh, yeah.
Ultimately,
right.
For a long time.
Yeah.
I never understood how we start a budget process without looking at what the community needs. And we determine we're not going to raise property tax, and that means the staff has to go back, put together a budget that basically is the status quo or less, because there's no money to fund any of the new programs.
Right. The council's, that obviously is a policy decision made by the council over the last 20 years. The only thing I'll say is that when we went out last year and did our engagement process and we asked people, how do you want to fund the ongoing priorities? They were pretty loud and clear that they did not want to see property tax increases, so I would say the council decisions that have been made in the past are reflective of what the public has said in terms of funding. There was much more support for a 1 cent increase. I understand what you're saying regarding the appropriateness of that as a funding source for some of these issues, but it's pretty consistent with what we heard.
Since Bob kind of lobbed that question at me, I will say that this has not been an easy exercise. It's frankly a lot more than what I thought I signed up for 3 years ago. With that said, I do a lot of my own homework as well, like we talked about that at one side, but there's for instance, there's 146,000 water bills that we serve today. 146,000 properties, let's say. That's commercial, residential. S&P that ranks our bonds, along with Moody's, in the executive summary, acknowledge that we serve a community of 1 million people. Only 380,000 people, 400,000, but the county's 500,000. We serve 1 million, mainly because geographically we're in an area that western Kansas has to get to, northern Oklahoma. So we serve 1 million people that use our services, drive on our streets, police, fire, ambulance, whatever you want to call it. And that's in Moody's and S&P. Go Wichita has another, I wish I could quote one, they say we have 6 million visitors a year. And we're not necessarily a destination vacation place. People talk about getting us here for 2 weeks. I'd rather make sure we keep them for 50 weeks and go somewhere else for 2 weeks. But that's a different story. But, so the thought is, do we do what you're talking about and put all the burden of all the services on the 146,000 water bills? But I agree with, I like what you're saying about the water thing. I'm not here to advocate it, but do 146,000 pieces of property support a million people that we serve, including medical stuff, and the 6 million visitors, or do we do that? And there's a lot of emotion around both sides of it, all sides of it, and I don't know where the council will end up being, but it's a pretty daunting task for me to be one of 7 to sit up there and say, well, I think this is what we ought to do, and I know better than everybody else that can maybe possibly vote. And so I'm not speaking on behalf of the whole council, I'm just telling you the inner turmoil that happens for me. So.
And the other issue, Pete, you started to talk about Moody's and Standard & Poor's, the rating agencies. They also want us to be as diverse as we can in our revenue sources, and an overdependence on any one revenue source is frowned on by Moody's. So if we got too heavy in property tax, I know we'd hear from them as well. Thank you.
It sounds like it's much better to have 6 million people participate in raising the $400 million we need to raise than the 146,000 or so property owners. So I would go for the sales tax. Thank you.
Just a quick comment. If we can't afford the sales tax on food, how can those same people afford an increase in property tax? Because those are, the same people that buy food, granted, some people can afford that increase in property tax, but a lot of those same people, if they can't afford the sales tax on food, how could they possibly afford it if we raise the property taxes? And it's just a comment.
On the property tax, I agree with her. If you have an asset of property, you may not have any money to pay the property taxes. On sales tax, if you just have a little bit of money, then you're just going to pay a little bit of sales tax.
I'm getting nervous looks from everybody here. I think we need to do the break.
Just last comment, if I may. Yes, poor people don't own properties for the most part. They don't own their homes. They rent. But the landlord is going to pass that expense anyway and raise the rent by 10, 20, 30, whatever it is. They're going to have to raise it.
You're right.
Don't pay rent on it.
Okay, everybody.
I want to thank everybody, by the way, and I will be here for questions afterwards.
Thank you all. all, there's again, the tables, you can get some real details and fill out the comment cards, and I appreciate all of you around as well. And thanks, Bob, thanks all the managers, appreciate it very much.